Hello everyone, myself Bhavani, and today I'm here to explain a concept of economics, that is the law of diminishing marginal utility. It is a daily life concept that we can see it everywhere, we can witness it everywhere. So, to dive into the topic, I would like to share a photo of a cartoon. So here we have two faces of the same person, and here the person is really hungry in the first picture and is eagerly waiting to take a bite of a pizza. When he does that, he is extremely happy, he is extremely satisfied. We can see by his face. On the other hand, the second picture of him, where he's taking the ninth slice of the pizza, and you can make out he's not that much satisfied as taking the first slice of pizza. Now, here we're not talking about this person, that why, what happened to him, why did he eat pizza, or so on. So, the thing which we are going to learn here is the law which governs his behavior, the law which tells about his behavior. So let's start the topic. In the introduction, the law of diminishing marginal utility is the principle which we witness in our regular course of practical life. So we see it, as I said before, we see it in our daily course of life. Satisfaction of human wants follows or results in some important laws. One among such law is the law of diminishing marginal utility. As I said, here we are dealing with the behavior of a person, that is, satisfaction is the main focus of this law. And that's what we are going to learn it. And one such law which tells about the satisfaction level of the consumer is the law of diminishing marginal utility. This law was first led by Austrian economist Gaussen, hence it is also called as Gaussen's first law. And in course of time, it came to be known as law of diminishing marginal utility. So that's all we can know in the introduction part. Next, let us move to the basic terms which we have to keep in mind while reading this law, or it could be more helpful if we are here with certain concepts. So the first one is utility. Utility seems a very basic word, but in economics, utility means the amount of satisfaction, or as the definition says, the term utility means satisfying capacity of goods or services by consuming them. So basically, utility is measuring satisfaction. Telling the satisfaction is itself the utility. Utility may be different. I can get different utilities by consuming different products. I may not get same utility while consuming a chocolate or consuming some other food. So utility is subjective concept. Next, we'll move on to marginal utility. It's like a close relative to utility, but a bit different. Marginal utility, as the definition says, if the consumption is increased one unit after other, the utility derived by each unit is called as marginal utility. In simple words, utility derived by each unit is called as marginal utility. So, if I have to tell it in a simple way, then marginal utility is the utility derived by one product, single product. Let us take an example of a couple of apples which I'm going to consume. So I take the first apple, I get the utility of 20 units, and I take the second apple and I get utility of 15. So if I have to tell what's my marginal utility for the first product, then I would tell it's 20. And what is the marginal utility for the second? I would tell 15. Whereas the total utility would be sum of the both first and second apple, which is 35. So basically, marginal utility is the extra utility which keeps on adding as you consume, as you go on consuming the same product again and again. It is also called as the additional utility which you derive by consuming the same product. Now, in this picture, as I've drawn, you can see that, as I said, taking the first apple, eating the first apple, second apple, third, fourth, my utility goes on decreasing. And then the marginal utility, I've colored it with a separate color, each different color. So these boxes indicate the marginal utility, whereas the entire thing is the total utility. That's a very simple difference between marginal and total utility. So this is about the basic terms which we are going to learn in this theory. Next, we'll move on to the assumption. These laws are quite hypothetical in nature. So, to see that, to make sure that we understand the behavior of a consumer properly and it could be studied in a proper way, we are going to keep certain things constant so that those factors don't influence, so that we get the real reason behind his behavior. So for that we have certain assumptions. Assumptions are those which we assume to be happening while we take down the observations and plot it in a graph. Let's start with the assumption. Before starting assumption, let us look into definitions. These are three definitions which are given. The first one is given by Alfred Marshall. The additional benefit with that which a person derives from a given increase in stock of thing diminishes with every increase in the stock that he already has. And then Baumol, as the quantity of a commodity possessed by a person increases, its marginal utility to him diminishes. And in general, or in simple words, if I have to tell what exactly this law states, means it states that as a person purchases or consumes more and more of a commodity, the marginal utility derived from the commodity diminishes. So these are the definitions which you may have to write in the examinations. Okay, let's start with the first assumption. Utility is measured in numbers. You can assign a number to represent how much you enjoy each apple. For example, you might rate the first apple as 10 and the second as 8 and so on. So here we are taking the example of consuming apples. So all the assumptions I'll be explaining with regard to apples. The first one is utility is measured in numbers, means satisfaction as we measure length in meters or kilometers. The same way, the utility, which I said, the amount of satisfaction, it is put down into numbers so that we can analyze his behavior. As you can see, the first apple he gets utility of 10, 8, 5. On second he gets 8, and on third 5, and so on. So this is that satisfaction is being measured in numbers. Let us go to the second assumption. The units of the consumption must be in standard units. You're consuming each apple in the same way, so you can compare them equally. For example, you eat the whole apple rather than slices or different varieties. Oh, it should be 8. So this assumption basically says that the units which are you are consuming, it should be in standard units. Like we have decimal which are not really standard, like 1.5, 1.9. That's not how the units to be taken. The units should be in standard units, like 1, 2, 3. They have to be countable, and that's what is said in the picture also. As you can see, one whole apple is considered rather than a half apple or a quarter apple. Let's move on to the Third assumption, there is no time gap between the consumption of two commodities. You're eating the apples one after the other without waiting in between, that there is no delay between finishing one apple and starting the next. Like, I have a couple of apples. Suppose there are six apples. Now the thing is, I eat one apple, I complete eating it, and the very next moment I'm going to take the second apple and start eating. So here there is no time gap at all. Suppose I can't do the other way, like I can't eat the first apple today and wait for some time, wait my hunger to build, and then the next day I won't eat the second apple. So when you give a time gap, you'll not be able to measure it in a proper way. That's why there should be no gap while consuming the two consecutive commodities. Let's move on to the fourth assumption. The consumer should be rational. You're eating the apples to satisfy your hunger in the most effective way possible, which is a rational decision. Rational means you can say logical thinking or using your brain in a proper way. Suppose I want to eat apples, I have the urge to eat apples, I won't keep it aside and I want satisfaction. I don't look into other factors. I just look in that I have to get more satisfaction. That is the main purpose of consuming apple. That's what is rational decision or logical thinking, right? The next assumption is the taste and preference of the consumer do not change. Throughout the process, your liking for apples doesn't suddenly increase or decrease. Now, it is quite hypothetical that our preferences do change, but here what we are going to consider is, suppose a girl has planned to eat apples and she'll stick on to eating apple no matter how much the diminishing rate of utility to her is. That is, I consume first apple, I can't go purchase some other fruits like mango and eat it. I have to stick on to apple and I have to be consuming the same apple again and again. The next one is the prices of the commodities must remain constant. Let us assume that the price of each apple stays the same. This means the cost of each apple doesn't change. You're making consumption decisions based solely on your satisfaction from eating them. Now, there is a reason why this assumption is there. Suppose I have this so many apples. Here I have mentioned four apples. Suppose one is 10, the other is 20, and the other is 100. And when I consume each apple, I see the price also. So price can also influence my level of satisfaction. I'll be less satisfied if I have to pay 100 rupees for an apple and eat it. And then I'll be more satisfied if I have to pay 10 rupees and eat the same apple. So here price may influence the behavior, but here we are solely uh, putting down the information or observation based on only and only the level of satisfaction. So, other than the product, nothing, the price should not influence the satisfaction level. So, we are keeping the price of each and every apple that we are going to consume the same. Next, the units of the commodity must be same in all the respects. Each apple you eat is the same type, quality, ensuring consistency in your consumption experience. Whether it's first apple or the last, they're all identical. Yes, this is also a criteria that all the apples which we consume should be of the same size, same quality, same taste, which is hypothetical, which is not really it can be applied in real life. We don't get the same identical apple all the time. But here, since we have to study the law, we are assuming this, like there should be no green apple or a apple which has a worm in it, which is not in a good condition. Every all the apples should be identical in all the respect. Maybe the taste, the color, the quantity, and so on. So these are the seven assumptions which we are going to assume. Now, next, I have a table which depicts the same, and I have a graph and one more graph. Let us understand this. So, first, the table has three columns: number of apples, marginal utility, and the total utility. Number of apples. So, I said I have taken 7 apples here. And let us see what will happen when I keep on consuming, keeping all the assumption in mind which I just mentioned. Let's start. Okay, I consumed the first apple. The marginal utility which I got was 20, and the total utility is of course 20. Total utility is adding from the first. And on consuming second apple, the utility which I got was 15, and total utility adds up the 2, that is 20 plus 15, which is 35. And same with the third, it comes out to be 10, and then the total utility adds up to 45. The same way goes on until you eat the fourth apple. Now there comes a twist. When I take to eat the fifth apple, I'll eat it, but I'm really not satisfied. I didn't get any amount of satisfaction on consuming the fifth apple. So obviously the satisfaction is 0. So we are going to mention here 0, and the total utility is the same. That is 50 plus 0, which will be again 50. And when I take to eat the sixth apple, though I'm really not willing, I'm stomach full and I don't have any kind of desire to eat the next apple. If you force me to eat the other apple, then it results in disutility. Disutility, like you don't get any satisfaction. In fact, it goes into negative. The marginal utility will be -5, and obviously your total utility will add this -5, which becomes 45. And if you're forced to consume one more and it comes out to be -10, it will also be deducted. So this is about the table. And if we plot in a graph, you can see here on the y-axis we have taken marginal utility, on the x-axis we have taken the quantity. If we plot according to that, what is the satisfaction we get on consuming first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and on the sixth you get a negative. You get a straight line which is sloping downwards. And here we have plotted total utility with the units. One thing you can see is on consuming the fifth apple, if you see here, the total utility starts to decrease. Until that, it was increasing. At the point where the satisfaction is 0, it remains constant, and when it goes on adding the negative marginal utility, it comes down. This is about the graph and the table. Uh, this is the same thing which I just explained about the graph and the table. You can look into it later. And then let us understand the importance. What is the importance of learning this law? We don't read anything just randomly. There is certain purpose behind learning any concept. So the first one is it provides basis for several other laws, such as principle of equimarginal utility, the principle of consumer surplus, and the law of demand, etc. So this law is not only limited to certain area, it is used in three laws which I just said, which we'll be learning later. That is the first importance. The second one is explains about the famous diamond water paradox value. The supply of water is high and its price is low, and no value, whereas the supply of diamond is very low and hence its price or value is high. Marginal utility of diamond is high and hence its price is also high. Diamond water paradox is like comparing the two. Water is in abundance and diamond is very scarce. Therefore, the marginal utility which you get from water is very less. The amount of satisfaction you get from water is very less. That's why its price is also less. But whereas the marginal utility which you get from diamond is way too high. That's why its price is also high. You can't expect someone to behave the same thing if you give a glass of water and then you hand him a diamond. Obviously, his reaction to the two products will be totally different. That's what sets the price for the two, diamond and water. Next one is price discrimination. By offering different prices for the different quantities of product, exploiting variation in consumer marginal utility. In simple words, price discrimination is for the same product you're going to put, or you're going to give the price, different prices you're going to allocate for the same product. And this can be done by measuring the marginal utility. Suppose certain consumers have a very much high level of satisfaction for a product. So when they get high amount of satisfaction for a particular product, they'll be ready to pay how much ever they want for that product. So keeping that in mind, the seller can increase the price of his commodity, thinking that they derive maximum satisfaction, so obviously they'll be willing to pay more. So he's exploiting. So by understanding the marginal utility, you can actually set prices. The next one is resource allocation. It informs that the producers and the policymakers about how to allocate resources efficiently by considering the diminishing returns associated with each additional unit of input. Yes, now this is quite important. Suppose there is a market and there is a seller who wants to produce certain commodities. He can't be monotonously producing the same product and make a lot and lot of output and send it to the market. Now this may decrease the demand, or like if there are so many products, how can a consumer consume the same thing again and again? So he should be very careful in allocating the resources so that he can produce which is needed for the market, not more than what is needed in the market, and reduce the wastage of the resources. So these were few of the importance of the law. Next, let's come to the last part, which is criticism. Criticism is searching the drawbacks of the law, like why is this law not appropriate? Why is it not fully arriving at the results desired? The first one is utility cannot be measured in numbers as it is psychological and subjective. The very first assumption which we saw itself is a drawback. Utility, the amount of satisfaction, is psychological. That is, it is psychological. You can't measure happiness, the things like happiness, sadness. You don't have a particular machine to measure it. And also, it is subjective. What the satisfaction which I get from eating a chocolate may not be in the case of others. Others may not be willing to eat chocolate. They may not get the satisfaction as how much I'm getting. So, utility, putting into numbers, is totally hypothetical and is unrealistic. The next one is assumption of no time gap between consumption of the two commodities. Yeah, even that is true. When, as I gave an example of an apple, you can't be consuming apple one by one, one by one, one by one. You may keep in the refrigerator and consume the next day. So it's not necessary that you always consume a commodity with a time gap. Without a time gap, you will definitely give a time gap while consuming. And the third one is not applicable to wealth or money. Yes, this is so true in the modern era. When you replace the apples with the 100 rupee note, and if I give you that chance, then obviously no one would be ever dissatisfied, or his satisfaction would never diminish, never decrease. So that's not applicable to wealth or money. Not applicable to consumption of intoxicants like alcohol and drugs. Now, I'm not the one who consumes alcohol or drugs, but as I've seen, people are very mad at consuming them. They're very much addicted to such intoxicants. So obviously, we can't see the decreasing satisfaction in those cases. Next one is not applicable to habits like collection of stamps or reading. So there are certain things which, uh, like stamp collection, is goes on increasing. Your satisfaction level never comes down in that, because that's what is the main criteria of collecting things, increasing the commodity. So there, application of this law fails. And next one is price variations can be seen in the market. So satisfaction could not be solely based on consumption of the units of the commodity again and again. It could be also because price may change. I may not be willing to buy an apple because it's way too costly. It is difficult for me to afford it. Then I would not really buy it. So satisfaction, price may also influence the satisfaction. Consumer may not be rational always. He can be influenced by other factors, social norms, psychological, etc. Yes, consumers may not be willing always to maximize her satisfaction. If I want to give an example, like if a person wants to buy an apple and then he's from a very poor family, he wants to eat apple, he wants to maximize its satisfaction, but he may not always do that. Maybe buying certain other groceries or vegetables would be necessary for his family rather than consuming apples. So not always you are driven by the fact of satisfaction, maximum satisfaction. Sometimes you may have to compromise with your satisfaction and see the good outcome that comes out of it. So that is the seventh criticism. The next one is limited scope applies to individual consumption decisions only and may not fully capture the complexities of production, investment, or market dynamics. See, as I said, this law is only limited to the consumer, like what is the satisfaction he gets and so on. It doesn't tell about other factors like production, what should be done in production, what should be done in investment, and other factors. So, thus limiting its scope. These are all the criticism, that is the drawbacks of this law. With this, I would like to conclude the video. Thanks for watching.